This is episode 113 of the Magic Detective Podcast. On this episode, you'll hear about the life of comedy magician Tommy Cooper. That and more on this episode of the Magic Detective Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Magic Detective Podcast, your podcast home for magic history. I'm your host, Dean Carnegie. I am the Magic Detective, and this is episode 113. So here's a bit of news, and I guess I should tell the whole story. A few years ago, a buddy of mine, Michael Stroud, sent me two canes that had belonged to Doug Henning. They were used in the Henning cane cabinet, and Michael had owned the original cane cabinet for a few years, and then he sold it to another magician, minus the canes. He kept all the original canes, which frankly were pretty beat up from use. And the person who purchased the cane cabinet stored it outside in a covered carport, and over time the elements destroyed it. So that piece of magic history is gone. But the canes remained. And just this past week, Michael's widow, Jeannie, sent me the remaining canes. So now I own all of the Henning canes from the cane cabinet. It was such a wonderful gesture, and I will think of both Michael and Doug whenever I see them. Michael, by the way, had a very Doug Henning-like quality to him, and he passed away a couple years ago, and I miss him all the time. Well, here we go again, another episode, and I must admit, I didn't know too much about Tommy Cooper until there was a statue erected in his honor. And when I saw that happen, because of the person who did the unveiling, which I'll talk about later, I really started to pay attention. And I figured if this person was interested in Tommy Cooper, if he was that big a fan, maybe he was somebody to look into. So since then, I've watched tons of Tommy Cooper videos. I know that some magicians didn't like Tommy because sometimes he would expose tricks. But I have to say, and this is just my opinion, the manner in which Tommy Cooper performed, I'm not sure that anyone really thought anything he did was actually legit. Everything was for a laugh, and it was pretty rapid fire. On occasion, he would actually succeed with a magic trick, which, frankly, probably caught the audience completely off guard. There are many, many videos of Tommy available online. I saw a video of him recently on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it seemed to take a while for the audience to catch on to what he was all about. But I know that Ed Sullivan was a huge fan of Tommy Cooper. The British public adored Tommy. Countless British comedians talk about how he inspired them. My two favorite bits were his spoon Jar Jar spoon and the robe that produced countless items. And I just learned today that David Copperfield bid on and won Tommy Cooper's robe in an auction. And I've not had the honor of visiting the museum, but I hope that there is a Tommy Cooper display there. That would be so cool. So let's get into the life of Tommy Cooper. Thomas Frederick Cooper was born March 19th, 1921 in Caerphilly, Glamorgan, Wales. He was born 2 months premature. Apparently, they weren't sure he would survive because of his early birth. His family was dirt poor back then, so all of it was a bit miraculous. But survive he did. His father was Thomas Samuel Cooper, born in 1892. He had previously been married and lost his wife and newborn son at childbirth, so the fact that Tommy Jr. survived is even more amazing. From the pages of the book Tommy Cooper, Always Leave Them Laughing by John Fisher, we learn that Tommy inherited his style of comedy from his father. Tommy would say his father was a happy-go-lucky sort of man, but others knew him to be quite the comedian. Not a professional comedian, but always doing funny things to amuse people. He even had that same guttural laugh that his son had. Tommy got his looks from his mother, who is said to have had the same eyes and nose as her son. And according to Jack Wright, who was a cousin, his mother was a lady who would dither a lot. When she went into the kitchen, she always seemed to panic, a real ditherer. This dithering behavior became a cornerstone of what would eventually be Tommy Cooper's onstage persona. During Christmas, when Tommy was 8 years old, his Aunt Lucy gave him an Ernest Sewell magic set. Mr. Sewell was a British magician who had performed before royalty and had produced a number of magic sets for budding hobbyists and would-be magicians. Tommy received one of these kits and became instantly enamored with magic. It soon became his every waking thought. Any spare money he might have was used to buy more tricks and books on conjuring. His early life he often spent alone. He had few friends, and even those he did have, he didn't associate with often. Tommy didn't mind being the center of attention, however, after showing a trick or a gag to people. But beyond the moments surrounded by magic tricks, the rest of his time was really rather sad. I found in more than one source a story of where Tommy would show his magic to his parents, and upon completing the demonstration, he would ask, "Did you see how it was done?" And they would answer yes, which, as you might imagine, crushed the boy's spirits. Magic aside, his parents were not the most affectionate. This was the case with Tommy and even Tommy's brother David, who would be born in 1930. They just didn't show affection for anyone. Other family members considered Tommy's mother to be a very stern, unfriendly lady. The father, though jovial, wasn't any more affectionate. And maybe this is where Tommy developed that personality that you couldn't help but love. He ached for approval and attention because he wasn't getting it from home. Was Tommy a good magician in his youth? According to the John Fisher book on Tommy, it seemed he was very anxious to perform new tricks and often without the needed practice. Fumbling the trick or messing it up was all part of the fun, and he enjoyed the laughs as well as the looks of amazement. Reaction is what Tommy was after, and that he always got. His manipulative skills were equally bad, apparently, but his comedic skills were far above average. After school, Tommy got a job in a shipyard in Southampton, which is a port city. He was 14 at the time, having gotten out of school early, and just as you might imagine, every opportunity to stop work and show his co-workers some tricks is just what he did. I get the impression he was much better at this point. Time and repetition has a way of making you improve. His bosses were not necessarily keen on his magic during work hours, but they gifted him an opportunity that would change his entire career. They had him do magic for a Christmas party for the shipbuilding company. And I'm not sure if Tommy had ever done a real show in his life. He had shared tricks with his friends, family, co-workers, and the like, but now he had to organize and put together a show for a big group. And it was a disaster, according to Tommy. Every single thing that could go wrong did just that, went terribly wrong. People began to laugh at him. The more he pushed forward, the worse it got. He panicked internally, and things got even worse. And the audience? Well, they were laughing hysterically. He left the stage dejected, humiliated, and in tears. And then he suddenly realized, several minutes after having left the stage, they were still laughing. Wait, he thought to himself, maybe I'm onto something here. And that was the beginning of his manic, disastrous magic act that most always went wrong. I say most always because he would occasionally do a trick that worked, which endeared him to the audience even more. But make no mistake, Tommy Cooper's fumbling and bumbling in the future would not go from lack of practice. Rather, he was very calculated in how he approached things. He made sure that the failures were comedic. Everything was thought out and carefully choreographed. It appeared very haphazard on stage, but there was a serious method behind the madness. He wanted to get the maximum number of laughs from these props. Plus, He would eventually throw in sight gags like his horn-rimmed glasses with two giant horns on the sides. His egg bag routine is brilliant on a couple levels. First, watching it, you're certain he's going to screw it up. It begins with his typical opening, an egg in a bag, an egg in a bag, and then there would be a pause, and this would be followed by a joke or two, and then he would repeat the egg in a bag, and then more jokes. And then he would do the old gag of pretending to put it under your arm, which was perfect for Tommy Cooper. All the arm-raising bits followed until he showed that the egg was gone. And then he would go to produce it again, only to discover that indeed it really was gone. The routine was all character-driven. The egg not reappearing might have seemed like a failure to the audience, but it was a subtle, magical ending. And it just happened out of Tommy's control. In 1940, Tommy was drafted into the military. He was first a trooper in the Royal Horse Guards. In his 7 years with them, he finished by attaining the rank of sergeant. Later, he joined Montgomery's Desert Rats, which was the 7th Armored Division of the British Army. While serving, Tommy became part of the NAAFI, which is the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institute's entertainment party. And here we have yet another integral part of the story. He had created an act combining jokes and magic for the British troops. As the story goes, he was in Cairo, Egypt, performing a comedy sketch routine, and he was supposed to have a costume on that included a pith helmet, but he didn't have it with him. So he borrowed or stole a hat from a waiter. This got a huge laugh all its own, and the hat he took was known as a fez. He continued to wear a fez his entire career. It became part of the Tommy Cooper brand. Here are a few points about the fez. The original fez was slightly taller and a darker red color, perhaps maroon. Tommy would eventually settle upon a shorter and brighter red-colored fez. Also, Tommy would not be the first to wear a fez. It dated back to the early 1920s, and by the time Tommy began wearing them, many magicians had them. In fact, in America, our own Al Cohen would wear one during his act. It became iconic with him, but Tommy surely outlasted them all. I believe in his earlier career, starting out in magic, Marvin Roy, who would later go on to become Mr. Electric, wore a Turkish outfit with a fez. If memory serves, I recall seeing a magic catalog that had a fez that was either used as a change bag or an egg bag. So it was a fairly common prop in the magic world. In 1947, while in Egypt, Tommy met Gwen, who would become his wife. Gwen was a civilian entertainer. She played piano and did comedy. And the two of them hit it off, and Tommy soon proposed. He called her Dove as a nickname, and that name stuck throughout the rest of their lives. For a period, they did a double act together, but Tommy was really destined to be a solo act. That decision was Dove's. Tommy wanted to continue the double act, but she knew that the real success ahead would be Tommy performing alone. After the war, Tommy and Dove were back in England and struggling. He started pitching blow books and Svengali decks to make a few extra bucks. Times were hard. Dove took various real-world jobs just so they could survive, but things were about to change. In 1947, Tommy went to audition for a band leader named Miff Ferry. His first audition didn't go well, but Miff suggested some changes to the act, and Tommy came back a few weeks later, and this time, why, he had the band laughing. That was enough to get him hired. Working a spot in Miff's show lasted for a while until Miff reluctantly realized that, well, Tommy had something. There was something here that could potentially go places, so he offered to represent him, and they worked out a deal. Miff would remain with Tommy his entire career, and by all accounts, Miff did keep Tommy working, but initially the clubs were sort of second rate. At one point, he even had to take a cut in salary. I suppose he was already getting a cut because Tommy had to pay Miff an agent fee and a manager fee, which came to 15%. Tommy would gripe about this throughout his life, but never took any action to end the working relationship with Miff. In some of the venues he played early on, there was not so much as a peep from the audience. Either they didn't understand the act, or maybe they were just too snooty. At one point, he walked out and told the audience to F off. When the booker got wind of what Tommy had done, she actually sided with Tommy over the behavior of the audience. It wasn't until 1951, when Tommy was working in London with the Folies Bergère. According to the John Fisher book on Tommy Cooper, the critic from the Daily Telegraph considered that the ensemble lacked inspiration and gave evidence of under-rehearsal. But he conceded that the best individual turn was provided by Tommy Cooper as a hopelessly incompetent magician. I have never before seen anyone do as little as Tommy and yet be so terribly funny. I'd like to take a moment now to dispel the notions about Tommy Cooper. One, that he was a bad magician. Two, that he didn't care about exposing magic. The truth was, Tommy loved magic. He was obsessed with it. He frequented all the magic shops in England for a time, even owned his own magic shop, which he had his wife Gwen running it and Alan Allen managing and doing the demos. That shop, by the way, never had Tommy Cooper's name attached to it, even though he was the owner. As to the other shops, he was constantly ordering effects from these various places. He loved mail order and receiving boxes of magic in the mail, and he loved all kinds of magic. Just because he would order a trick did not mean that particular thing would end up in his act. In this way, he was not unlike most magicians. We all buy stuff that we never end up using or never makes it into our show. Tommy was just the same. He knew what worked best for him and what didn't, but that didn't stop him from buying stuff that did not fit him. He also enjoyed other magicians, both watching them and meeting them. As his image grew in the public mind, other magicians would offer bits to him. Sometimes he would see other performers' acts and ask if he could use a bit or a line from their shows. Sometimes they agreed, sometimes not. One of my favorite Tommy Cooper bits is when he taps his chest and looks uncomfortable and says, "I've had a pain there all day." And then he reaches into his chest and removes a small pane of glass. This bit was given to him by another performer, but we know it now as a Tommy Cooper piece. Now, as to the exposure, there were a few things he did expose, but he also felt that those things were common knowledge among lay people. In other words, they had been exposed many times before Tommy ever touched them. And to be honest, having watched the way Tommy did his routines and made a joke out of so much, I just wonder how much of this material really was exposed in the minds of the audience. Perhaps they just enjoyed the humor of it, but not really thought that Tommy's way was the real way magicians did their tricks. And with Tommy, things were rapid fire, so it was really hard to keep track of some of the exposure, even if there was one. Kind of like when Penn and Teller do their cups and balls routine with the clear plastic cups. At one time, magicians were irate over this. But then when you watch them do it, it's impossible to follow, impossible to truly understand. And frankly, a good magician could follow them doing the cups and balls and they'd fool you because the exposure was just too much to comprehend. Oh, and back to, was he a bad magician? It could be debated that his manipulative skills were not exceptional, but in Tommy's show, he was the star, not the tricks, not the bits. It was all about his character, and often in other magic acts, it's about the tricks, and you could plug in any person into the magician's role. You just simply couldn't do that with Tommy. His presentational style was all his own. You could copy it, but you'd be doing a blatant copy of Tommy Cooper. His style was his, and it's what audiences looked forward to. It's also why he could do non-magic routines with great skill, too. Take his hat routine. That's comedy gold. The best part of how midway through the skit he pretends he's lost his place and can't remember the next line. I mean, that's genius. That section of the routine is hilarious, and yet it's all planned out. It plays that way every time, every laugh, very calculated. It's brilliant. Speaking of comedy, Tommy had his influences. The top were Max Miller, Bob Hope, Laurel and Hardy, Robert Orban, and Billy Glasson. Of these five, I was unfamiliar with Max Miller as he was famous in Britain and I'm an American. Also, he died before I was even born. However, I did look him up, and it turns out Max Miller was considered the greatest stand-up comedian of his generation. His career spanned from the 1920s until the 1960s. He died in 1963. He was quite funny. He developed many comedic songs, appeared on radio, and in 14 movies. He had a rapid-fire wit, not unlike Tommy Cooper's. You can certainly recognize the similarities. As for Bob Hope, again, quick wit, often character-driven comedy, and Laurel and Hardy had their slapstick approach to things, along with very specific comedic roles that they played. Robert Orban was an amateur magician, comedy writer, author, and political scriptwriter. Little did I know, he lived not far from me in Falls Church, Virginia, when I lived in the area. The last fellow, Billy Glasson, is another person I had not heard of. He was an ex-vaudevillian who had developed an encyclopedia of classified gags. His humor was used by the likes of Johnny Carson, Steve Allen, and others. You'd be hard-pressed to find better role models in comedy than these. As for magic, Tommy's overall love of magic was his inspiration. I couldn't nail down a specific magician that inspired Tommy, but his approach to magic was quite unique in his own way. In 1952, he started appearing on a show called It's Magic. He was supposed to just make one appearance, but the producers liked him so much, he became a recurring artist. Oddly enough, though the show was called It's Magic, it wasn't all about magic. It was about the magic within various other things like dance and art and music, etc. Sure, they had magicians on, but it wasn't the focus. In 1954, he was getting offers to come to America and perform. He accepted a spot in a review show at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. By all accounts, the show was terrible, with one exception, Tommy Cooper. In the John Fisher book, it's pointed out on page 190, this particular quote, "Jack Benny was in last night, and it was not until Cooper came on stage that he applauded." And that makes perfect sense to me. Jack Benny was all about character. Benny was one of those few comedians who could make an entire audience laugh without saying anything. In the same vein, Paul Daniels, the famous TV magician from England, relates a story in which Tommy Cooper at a banquet was about to speak. He stood up, and the moment he did, the audience began laughing. He looked over the room, and they laughed more. Finally, he turned to his wife, Gwen, and said, "I've not said anything yet." And the laughter grew even more. Tommy's career from the 1950s into the 1960s consisted mostly of performing in variety shows or shows with other acts. But nearly every time, Tommy was the standout artist, often receiving standing ovations. The press coverage would point out Tommy's sheer dominance over the other acts. Occasional spots on TV helped to raise his profile with the public. In 1963 and 1967, Tommy would be featured in America on The Ed Sullivan Show, the highest-rated variety show in America at the time. Tommy would make 5 appearances total. This all came about due to a recommendation to Mark Letty, the Ed Sullivan Show booker, from magician Jay Marshall. Ed Sullivan loved Tommy's act, referring to him as the funniest man that appeared on this stage. At least one of Tommy's appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show is available on YouTube. In 1966, Tommy had his first TV series, the 7-episode Cooperama. This would later be renamed Life with Cooper. Along with a new name came a change of format and more seasons ahead. This was a sketch comedy style show featuring Tommy Cooper, and it kept him in front of audiences. Whether it was Life with Cooper, the Tommy Cooper Hour, the Tommy Cooper Show, he remained a huge celebrity comedian in the eyes of the viewing public. Fisher, in his book, mentions how Tommy and Benny Hill were once associated, but Hill was not a theater performer, whereas Tommy was. And yet, when it came time to sell a TV series overseas, Thames Television went with the Benny Hill Show, which made him famous here in the United States. Imagine if it had been Tommy Cooper. He certainly had the shows and the material and the talent. Throughout his life, Tommy was a cigar smoker, smoking as many as 40 cigars a day. He also drank, and sometimes he drank a lot. And when he drank, it wasn't good for anyone. In live performances, he would sometimes blow through his material super fast due to his intoxication. Home life would also suffer, as Tommy could be an angry drunk. His health also began to deteriorate due to his years of smoking and drinking. When he learned he had trouble with his legs, he pulled back on his drinking, not completely, but enough for his health to improve a little. He suffered a heart attack during a live performance in Rome in April of 1977, but he would soon be back performing again. His shows in the latter part of his life suffered due to his health. Some were also due to poor decisions. One in particular was a terrible choice in having Tommy Cooper open for the rock group Police. The crowd, though they cheered Tommy initially, they soon turned on him and were throwing plastic cups at him on stage. It was an embarrassing moment in his career. On April 15th, 1984, on TV in the variety show Live from Her Majesty's, which was presented live on TV from Her Majesty's Theatre in Westminster, Tommy Cooper, wearing his long robe and fez, began to do his famous routine of pulling endless items from within his robe. On this night, however, he fell back against the curtains and collapsed on the floor. The theater audience was laughing hysterically. The home viewing audience were no doubt laughing until a commercial abruptly came up on the screen. When they came back from commercial, there was no Tommy Cooper. The program went on as if nothing had happened. Behind the scenes was a different story. An ambulance was called and took Tommy to Westminster Hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival. And, just like that, Tommy Cooper, the iconic TV star, comedian, magician, was gone. Since his death, there have been a number of Tommy Cooper revival shows where others have portrayed him and presented his act. There have been a few documentaries and even a TV movie. In 2008, a statue of Tommy Cooper was unveiled in his birthplace of Caerphilly. The unveiling was done by none other than Sir Anthony Hopkins, the actor. Tommy lives on in various video clips, many of which can be seen right now on YouTube. From the UK Daily Express paper on April 11th, 2009, we learned Tommy's scripts revealed his exacting detail in his routine. Everything was spelled out, including his facial expressions and how long he'd hold a pause and more. So the seeming haphazard, make-it-up-as-you-go style he adopted was actually very structured and specific in its creation and execution. And in that way, he really did fool us. He was not a buffoon doing tricks badly for laughs. He was a true magician. He had been deceiving us all along. And that, my friends, is the life of Tommy Cooper. If you enjoyed this video, please like it on your podcast platform, and please feel free to share it with anyone you think will enjoy learning more about magic history. Until next time, I'm Dean Carnegie. I am the Magic Detective. Please be well and stay safe.